To our top story, Keir Starmer said that councils won't get more cash under a Labour government because there is no magic money tree.
Labour's also claimed that people who live in council areas under its control are better off and pay an average of £276 less council tax than Conservative-run authorities. Well, we took a little bit of issue with that when we spoke to Annalise Dodds earlier on the programme, and one of the key things, and we've just heard more about that from Katie there in the headlines, is that Annalise Dodds is one of many in the Labour Party still supporting the Deputy Labour leader. Let's get into all of this now.
Yes, let's do exactly that. Assistant editor at The Spectator, Cindy Yu, joins us this morning. Good morning, Cindy. This Rayner stuff won't go away, will it? It just won't go away. And it's not about... And Starmer now standing behind her saying, yes, I believe that she's done all the right things. And but actually, it's not about that. It's about the optics, the principle. And here we go again, grubby politics.
Yeah, it's very, very tricky. You know, this happened before she became an MP, and I've just been reading up about it, all the complicated legal and tax-related things, because it's not just capital gains tax. There are other things, discounts that she may have had if it was her primary residence, but people are saying that it's not. So it's incredibly complicated. And so one can understand if it's an honest mistake she made before she became an MP, but she's saying that she didn't make this mistake at all. She's completely insisting that that was still her primary residence, even though neighbours at both places say that they never saw her there. So it is incredibly tricky, and for Starmer to be putting his own reputation on the line, Annalise Dodds too, as viewers have seen, you know, if more comes out in the story later on and no answers are forthcoming so far, so people are going to keep asking questions, then it's their own reputations on the line too.
How much actually do these stories hurt parties when they happen? Do the public just think, oh, it's just typical politicians, or could this actually hurt the Labour Party?
I think for Angela Rayner, the amount of money that we're talking about here is relatively small. If you think back to Nadeem Zahawi, who had his own troubles with HMRC a year or two ago, it was about £4.8 million in unpaid taxes. So this is totally different kettle of fish. So in that sense, you know, the scale is different. But Angela Rayner is one of those down-to-earth politicians.
It's that principle, isn't it?
Yeah, she is someone who you don't expect this kind of story to be following around. She is meant to be down-to-earth. She's meant to be a woman of the people. She didn't go to university. She had a teenage pregnancy. All of these things. So for her own personal brand, if she's found to have made mistakes here and then lied about it, that would be very damaging. And if the Labour Party have to lose her, then I think Keir Starmer loses a very effective lieutenant when it comes to the campaign this year.
So Labour's in quite an interesting position here, because it's about what Labour doesn't do. They really just have to tread water, because, of course, the poll lead is very convincing. When you look at the latest poll from The Sun, and we've got that, the voting intention is 45% to vote Labour, 24% for the Tories, and 12% for Reform. Now, that comes on the back of the YouGov poll. Again, very, very similar, but puts various slight differences in there, with Reform actually doing better. There's been a call from some Conservatives saying that Reform needs to do a deal with the Conservative Party. What do you make of that?
This is so interesting. So it's been reported that some Conservatives are saying, Rishi, give Nigel Farage the ambassador to Washington role and tell him, don't fight against us in certain constituencies. I mean, voters don't like these kinds of deal. You know, people like to know that they're voting for, you know, all the options in their constituency, and the people higher up are not telling them who they can and can't vote for. So I think there will be some reputational damage to Reform for doing that. But on the other hand, Nigel Farage does want to, you know, he's been saying recently that he's been made more money now than he's made in 30 years of politics, that he's enjoying post-politics life. And Donald Trump might be coming back in the US, and he loves bigging up their friendship. So it could be a pretty plummy role for him. But, you know, when frontline politics calls, a campaigner like Nigel Farage, can he really say no? And he's definitely left the door open for that.
And he's enjoying the speculation. I mean,
absolutely.
How long have we been talking about this? You think at some point he's going to have to choose a side? And we also know that he may be forced to have to declare that, because there's some complications about, you know, people standing politically, also hosting news programmes. And, of course, he falls into that category. For now, though, the Labour Party, all they've really got to do is kind of hold still, steady, not make any slip-ups. We learnt yesterday a little bit, didn't we, as they launched their local election campaign, what that's going to look like, the vision. And quite a lot of phrases and ideas borrowed, actually, from the Conservatives.
Yeah.
We heard about them praising Boris Johnson's idea of levelling up. We heard this phrase from Keir Starmer a few times, that they're going to take back control. I mean, you kind of think, pardon, what's happening here?
Yeah, absolutely. Season 5 of British politics post-Brexit has really gone full circle.
Yeah.
But I think it's a smart move from them. It's a smart move. This is what the Conservatives do all the time, right? They take Labour policies and they kind of force Labour into positions that really actually Labour doesn't want to be in. We saw that with the non-dom tax status early in the budget this month. So for Labour to say, levelling up was a good idea, but Rishi Sunak, the current Prime Minister, hasn't made it happen because he, A, doesn't care about you guys, B, doesn't know how you feel, all this sort of stuff. I think that's a really effective way of doing politics, especially going up to the local elections. But Starmer also said there's no magic money tree, again sounding like the Tories. So I think for the Labour Party, Rosie, you're totally right. All they have to do is hold still until the election now. But afterwards, they're not going to be able to fix a lot of the economic problems that the Conservatives have been facing either. And I think voters are going to very quickly realise that.
How much of this is actually people tired of the government and wanting a change? Because when you look at the poll as well, just in terms of the parties that people think will best manage things like the economy, cut taxes, stop the small boats and so on, it's Labour that comes out well, including improving the NHS. This is about people's lived experiences. So we know the NHS is falling apart. You've got 7 million people, 8 million people waiting for elective procedures, another hidden waiting list as well. But the reality is, if Labour gets in, they're going to be facing monumental problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, when people say that we trust Labour more on these things, Labour haven't said much about their policies at all, right? So when you mention how much of this is about kicking the current party in power, I think it is very much about that. It's the mentality of they surely can't be worse than the Conservatives, which maybe is a fair point. But it's not as if Labour have said much actively about any of these areas, really.
And we've talked about financially how much headroom they've actually got to do new radical things if they get elected. But one of the questions I think people have got is, and you've sort of maybe hinted at this already, Cindy, if the Labour Party are then elected, for how long will they have that public support to say they'd actually stay in power for? Because people suddenly realise things aren't improving here either.
So I think Labour have slightly more political leeway to be slightly tougher on public finances because they are the party from the left. When it comes to, for example, things like the doctors' strikes, for example, they can go to the unions and say, you have to get behind us now, we just simply can't afford this, in a way that's more palatable than Tories telling them that. So I think politically they do have slightly more room, but sooner or later voters are going to realise that actually the economy is the way it is, and Labour can do things to fix that, but A, we don't know what those things are, and B, often these policies will take some time to come in as well. Labour haven't said what money-raising methods they're going to use, other than a non-dom tax status reform, which the Tories
apparently
have just
is paying
taken.
for everything.
Yeah,
which
it's apparently paying for everything, and now the Tories have taken that anyway. So how is Labour going to have more fiscal headroom than the Conservatives are going to? I'm not sure, but they don't have to answer that question right now.
So
all they have to do is
what's the gossip on these honours? Because normally we see them at the New Year, we see them on the King's birthday, and here we are with some more honours. And Rishi Sunak, what does this say about what Rishi Sunak is doing? This is Mohammed Mansour, who gave 5 million quid to the Conservative Party, and then lots of politicians, Mark Spencer, Philip Davies, Tracy Crouch, Harriet Baldwin, also honouring people involved with Oppenheimer, the movie. What does this say about the state of where Rishi Sunak is, how long he's got to go? Also, if the local elections are absolutely appalling, are they going to boot him out?
I'd rather see Christopher Nolan given a peerage, I think, than a billionaire who is only good for the Conservative Party. And I'm not sure about the politics behind all of this, actually. And it's Easter break, it's recess, so maybe the situation is less febrile. But coming on the back of the Frank Hester row, I'd have thought that the Conservative Party wouldn't want to raise more attention to its dodgy donors. So I'm not sure about how smart it is to give Mansour this peerage now, but perhaps there was some kind of quid pro quo already agreed beforehand in return for the £5 million, which is unprecedented from this particular donor to the Conservative Party. But I think it is slightly tricky politics, given the Frank Hester row has barely died down.
Yeah, and therefore the Prime Minister still decided to go ahead with it, which maybe feels like he didn't read the room right. Or do you think the furore over this is going to die down?
Or perhaps the Tories are so desperate for money this year that they'll just, they're throwing everything at it. They'll be throwing everything at it.
Or is it about Rishi Sunak's legacy? Is it because also the funding for the election possibly, or he just thinks, I give up?
Yeah, so I think most likely the Conservatives will lose at the next election, right? That's not breaking news. But the question is, how badly will they lose? Maybe an extra £5 million, £10 million will mean that it's a smaller loss, than it would otherwise have been. Going back to Nigel Farage, he was talking this week about the Canadian Conservative Party, which basically came from a third party position to oust the Progressive Conservative Party. And so he was mischievously saying that Reform could basically oust the Conservatives as a second party. And if the Tories lose that many seats, it is possible. I mean, it's unlikely. And so Rishi Sunak will be thinking, how can we loss minimise right now? And maybe that's what he's thinking when it comes to his legacy too.